Greetings. This is Marcus Sankofa Nix, and I am honored and delighted to be here yet again for the History Heals Talk series. This is season 2, episode 1, and so we're going into 2025 with a bang. We recorded 8 episodes for season 1, and so definitely decided and geared up for all that's in store for 25 and beyond moving forward. So in this platform, as I like to say, learn from the past, heal for the future. The focus of this platform and this talk series and the shows and the episodes that we produce is to foster therapeutic dialogue, to bring the community closer together, to foster healing, and to bring us to optimum wellness while reflecting on the lens of history, its impacts. And so I'm so honored to be here today to have a mentor or a Jegna of mine, one who is an esteemed elder in the community, one who has put in a lot of work, and one who is always there to offer aid, assistance, support. He's a cheerleader, and so on and so forth. And his name is NAt Alston. And so I'm going to get into how we connected and how we met in a little bit. But before we get into that and before we get into the conversation at hand, I just want to say, for those tuning in, be sure to hop online. We're everywhere. So History Heals Consulting, you can go to Facebook, Marcus Sankofa Nix, or History Heals. You can check out both of those entities, and it'll still bring you to the same place to see the work that's being done. You could go to Instagram. Handle at History Heals and see what's going on there. Go to LinkedIn and under my name, Marcus Sankofa Nix, you can see what's being done with History Heals. And you can go onto the website if you have any questions or if you were looking for some support. If you have a business, a company, a nonprofit, an educational institution, a cultural institution, a museum, so on and so forth, just hop on historyhealsconsulting.com. historyhealsconsulting.com to learn more about what we offer. And then finally, be sure to check out our previous episodes. So once again, you can hop on YouTube, History Heals Consulting, and you can see this episode, last week's episode, and also all the previous episodes that have come about. So for today, we're going to be focusing on the relevance of Black museums, Black institutions, and historic preservation. The relevance of Black museums, Black institutions, and historic preservation. And so Mr. Nat, I like to affectionately call him as Uncle Nat because he's definitely family. He's definitely family. And we haven't even known each other that long yet. The way we met doing work at a local historic site, a local museum in Howard County, I would say that our connection was organic and natural from the very start, from the very beginning. And so I know that Uncle Nat will tell his story through and through as we get on with the interview and the conversation, but just some tidbits that I will share for the public and those tuning in who may not know you as well as I affectionately do. So Mr. Nat, and I'll read a little bit about the bio, and he can, fill in the gaps wherever need be. But in terms of Mr. Nat and all the wonderful works that he's done, he's the president and founder of NatAlston.com, a human capital consulting firm specializing in human resource strategic planning, succession planning, talent acquisition, executive search, business coaching, and management and leadership development training. He also has spent 10 years in law enforcement, serving as Maryland State Police Officer, Prince George's County Police Officer, and a Director of Public Safety, Bowie State University, which is also my alma mater as well too. So shout out to Bowie State. Um, Also, he is the founder of the National Association of African Americans in Human Resources, and I know that he and a collection of other wonderful individuals have done all types of impactful work here in the States and even beyond, all under the guise of working and supporting Black folks in the realm of human resources. I know that Mr. Nat is also the president and founder of Ujamaa Business Roundtable as well, doing a lot of work supporting Black businesses locally here. And then also, he served as a board member of the Reginald F. Lewis Museum, has been a former commissioner of the Howard County, Maryland Equal Business Opportunity Commission. And the work he has done has ranged not only locally here, but also all the way to Ypsilanti, Michigan, as well too. Um, He's a board member working with youth. I know he's connected to Love is the Answer. Shout out to brother AJ Ali and the fabulous team and the work that is being done. Listen, family, I can go on and on and on. And so once again, Mr. Nat, Uncle Nat, thanks for joining us here. How you doing? We're on the other side of 2025. We've crossed over. Thank you for tuning in. Much love to you and your family. How you doing on this fabulous Friday evening?
Marcus, I am doing well. Thank you so much for the invitation to be a part of your history healing consulting. I'm really excited about what you're doing. And when you explain that to me and to the audience, I'm extremely excited of what you're doing in terms of making sure that throughout history it also helps for us healing us as a people of color. So again, Happy New Year to you. Looking forward to 2025. And I am doing well. Thank you so much for asking.
No problem, no problem. And it's such an honor to be around you. And I wholeheartedly mean it when I say I love you. I appreciate you. Like I said, we haven't known each other, but just for a few years.
Few
But
years.
the
Yes.
work,
Yes.
yeah, but the work we've done has been so impactful.
Mm-hmm.
And so to go right into our conversation, because I know time will fly, for those tuning in, listening, a local museum here, Howard County Center of African American Culture, tucked away here in Columbia, Maryland, and Howard County. A couple years ago, Uncle Nat was brought in to be the executive director and to provide a vision moving forward to reestablish and open the institution so that way that culture and history locally of African Americans in Howard County could flourish and be known. And I, yours truly, was brought in to support and accompany the museum and Mr. Nat as a curator. And so I took my experience from outside of the classroom as a historian, as an educator. And so there were a lot of things that we did working together to bring the museum to the forefront, educational programming, implementing things of sustainability. And though you never know what the future may hold, I believe that people come into your life for a reason and things happen for a reason. And so there's a lot of things that we learned along the way. And so once again, we'll get into that in a little bit. And shout out to Brother Jai Logic, who is showing some footage and some images of what took place with the work we did. But before we even fully go there, because we will go there and we'll talk about, just how impactful that experience was. Mr. Nat, first, if you can, share with everybody a little bit about your background, perhaps where you come from,
Sure.
and a little bit about family history, and then we'll
Sure.
bring things up to more contemporary times.
Sure. Thank you very much. Well, starting from the beginning, as they say, I'm a native Marylander, was born here in the state of Maryland in Baltimore City, and then primarily was raised in two areas in Baltimore County, one Sparrows Point. And for history's sake, if people remember Bethlehem Steel down in the Sparrows Point area, that's where I grew up. It was a company town. And most of the people, really, I can't say most, all of the men predominantly worked at Bethlehem Steel because it was a company town. The company basically created that small community, both black and white, and this was during segregation. And my parents basically were there along with my grandparents. So the men in that community worked at Bethlehem Steel. I grew up there for a short period of time and then moved when the company was getting ready to expand and move some of the homes away. We moved to another black community in Baltimore County, not too far from Sparrows Point, called Turner Station. And so I was educated really at a small black elementary school called Bragg Elementary, rather, and for the first 6 years. And then I'm a graduate of a school that unfortunately is no longer there in Turner Station called Solace Point High School. So it was a junior, senior high school there, and we lived in Turner Station. And I would say those two communities, Marcus, when we look at history and recalling the times that I grew up there, were absolutely impactful because I saw people who looked like me, parents who looked like my parents, and saw them actually going to work. The fathers were going to work at the steel mill. And when we got to Turner Station, the same thing. I grew up in a community, when we talk about history, it was founded by a person many years back. And we grew up in a community that had professional people. I used to say to people when I grew up there, I didn't know any difference because I had people who were teachers, who were doctors, who were lawyers, not that they were barbers. Also had people in there that were dentists. So we were pretty much self-contained. So I grew up in seeing role models covering really every aspect. We even had, when you mentioned my background in law enforcement, we had a couple of Baltimore County Police Department, police officers there. So really, history, when I think back now, that Turner Station community is still there. The church that I attended is still there. I have some friends and relatives that are still down there in Baltimore County, and that's the southeastern side of Baltimore County. And for people that are in the Maryland area in terms of history, and I know it's probably nationwide, when the accident occurred, when the ship hit that bridge, the Francis Scott Key Bridge back in March, well, that bridge connected two parts of Baltimore, Anne Arundel County and Baltimore County. Well, if you were traveling on that bridge in terms of history, you would travel and really go past the community that I grew up in. So really, when I see that bridge now, even though it's no longer there, I know it connected those communities of Anne Arundel County and also Baltimore County. And I remember, yes, that Francis Scott Key Bridge that he's showing right now, that really sent shivers to me because the connection was to my community, Turner Station, in the Dundalk area. So we definitely recognize that as from a historical standpoint. I remember when that bridge was being built, when it was completed. And the ironic thing about it, it happened, I think, in March. And probably 2 weeks earlier, I crossed that bridge from living in Columbia, going back to my home community to attend a funeral of one of my dear high school classmates. So you start thinking about, again, history. That was immediate, but we remember those areas and that time there. So again, that's my snapshot in terms of family history, where I'm from. Moved away, but then moved back here to Columbia staying close to my Maryland roots.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you for sharing that. And one of the things that I think about Uncle Nat is the stereotypes, and the falsehoods, especially that are always pervasive about Black folk or African Americans. When you think about segregation, and you lived it, I did not.
Mhm.
My kin and my ancestors and my family members, they went through it. But there's this um, falsehood about us not being able to have our own communities.
Mhm.
And so even with segregation, even some of the scholarship and some of the literature would suggest that we needed to integrate with something that was better, because what we had was not self-sufficient. What we had was less than. And obviously, of course, perhaps there were some resources or things that we did not have access to. Sure. However, what you're saying, Uncle Nat, is you didn't have to leave your community to see uh, community support, to see
Mhm.
role models, to see working folks, and to see strong families, and to see example setters. You didn't have to leave your community to see that. I think
That's
that that's
true.
really, really important. And that's why I also believe it's important to tell our own story. And so my next question for you, Uncle Nat, as you continue wanting to flesh out your story and your history, what were some of the lessons that you learned early on about the importance of family, the importance of community? How
Mhm.
did that shape you and mold you? And history, what did you learn
Yeah.
early on?
Yeah, I will tell you right now, Marcus, when you live in a community and you saw people who look like you, number one, and you lived in that community where you saw men, for an example, who went to work because that's what they had to do. And you saw that sense of community. We had church there. We
Hmm.
had a Baptist church as well as a Methodist church, and that was in Sparrows Point. And then when I moved, really the major impact, I think, was when I moved to Turner Station and seeing people totally not so much different in terms of ethnicity, but in terms of the vocations and jobs that they had. Back then in Sparrows Point, the only way that you could really live there, you had to work at one location, and that was Bethlehem Steel. But when I moved over to Turner Station, as I mentioned earlier, we had people who were the teachers who taught me, some of them lived in the community.
Mm.
The bus driver lived in the community. We also had something people would think, well, gee, that was significant. We had even a cab service. We had people who were entrepreneurs that had a cab service. So if you didn't have a car or your car was broken down and you wanted to catch your cab to maybe another part of the community, you would call this company who lived in the community that had a cab service. Or if you were sick, ironically, we had at least 3 doctors there in
Mm.
our community that lived there. So I didn't have to go outside and maybe get a doctor. If I had and that doctor prescribed a prescription, I took it to the pharmacy, and the
Mm.
pharmacist was a Black pharmacist.
Ah,
So
hello.
I started seeing people in various careers, not just and no disrespect to, we had barbers, sure, we had preachers there, we had an undertaker there, but we also had people that owned a gas station. We had
Hmm.
people that owned a laundromat. We had people, like I said, that owned their own businesses, even a nightclub there back in the day. So we had a lot of things that were self-contained. And I joked, I said, the only way that we really had to go outside of the community was possibly the bank and the post office. But
Mm.
generally, everything else, the grocery stores, we had 2 of those. So it was pretty much from my standpoint, and I was going into my junior year in high school. And when you looked around, you saw people who looked like you, and you could either walk to what they were doing, or in my case, I could get my bike and bike to them. Or if they were maybe a mile away or a little bit further, we got a cab or we got our own car and drove to where they were. So the community was self-contained. And even when we talk about sports, we had our own sports teams. So
Okay.
really, we were a self-contained city or town, similar to probably what historians would talk about in Florida, maybe Rosewood, or even
Okay.
going all the way out to Oklahoma. We were probably not as affluent as Tulsa, but we were still very middle class, and we had our own set of economic pluses there with the entrepreneurs and women and men who were doing things. So what that did for me, and I think it did for a lot of people, was opening up the doors and say, well, if they can do it, so can I.
Sure.
I didn't have any, we didn't know what restrictions were,
Mm.
and sure, there were segregation there, but when you're in a environment that you see people, in my opinion, thrive, and not just survive, but thrive. And from an economic standpoint, you saw where the funds would circulate in the community 4, 5, 6 times. And you see doctors, lawyers, teachers, pharmacists, gas station owners, barbershop owners, people that own their own business. It gave you a sense of confidence that you could do what you wanted to do and that there was no restrictions. And oh, let me add one more thing too that was also
Sure.
strong in our community. We were one of the few communities that had our own movie theater.
Wow.
Yes, we did.
Wow.
We had our
Wow.
own movie theater. And I remember as a young boy, I would go to those movie theaters, and that movie theater was created and built by a Black doctor in that community. So when we wanted to be entertained, we didn't have to go outside. We could go to the movie in our own community. So when you had that environment, Marcus, I would say to you, unfortunately, is no longer there. But when we talk about history, how it shapes sometimes for the future, growing up in that community gave me a sense that I could do whatever I wanted to do. And there was
Wow.
no restrictions.
Oh, wow. 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 One of the things that's so challenging about just reflecting on all the wonderful things that you said is, and you and I have had so many conversations,
Oh, yes,
different
we have.
spaces about a lot of stuff. But you look at developers, who move in and they come to buy up stuff and to set up shop and to put their high rises up or to put their shopping center up or whatever the case may be. And I find that so many precious communities, I think about what you're saying, your community, but just in general, these Black communities,
Mm-hmm.
that erasure of history, it's not just in textbooks, but it also is the removal of people off their land or
Mm-hmm.
pushing in on the land. And so those memories and the historic relevance and significance is toppled over. People don't know it. And so that's how it gets deleted,
Yeah,
eliminated, and
yeah,
erased.
yeah.
And so I think
So that
about
gets me,
that.
if I may add, that's
Yes,
what gets
sir.
us back to what you just said. It gets us back to our thoughts when we were at the museum.
Yep.
And when I had the opportunity to be on the board of the Reginald Lewis Museum in Baltimore and walking in there and seeing all of the history. And I'm a history buff, a history nut, I love genealogy also, but love our history. And when you walk into that museum and I think it's the second floor, you start seeing the history, Black history in Maryland. And things that, even though I was in Turner Station, Spurs Point, that museum shared with me other communities inside the state of Maryland that were Black communities and how they, during segregation and all, were thriving and surviving. I remember going to the museum and seeing places like Carr's Beach and Sparrows Beach down on the Annapolis side near the bay, and how those communities thrived and survived like that. So there were similarities in there. And in my generation, sometimes I say, you know, in a way, integration hurt us because we moved away, but we got away from that core of togetherness. But when you go to those museums and you see the reflection of that history, and I think that's what drove me to the, as they said, as you said earlier, the consultancy, and then being asked to be the executive director of the Howard County Center of African American Culture, because Howard County had that history also.
Mhm.
And you've got to maintain that and preserve that, because if you don't, people don't remember, or it gets erased. So it opened up my eyes to places like Rosewood. It opened up my eyes to even taking into consideration what went on in Tulsa and understanding the whole aspect of that Tulsa environment and the Tulsa massacre out there, and seeing people who survived that. So I think our love, yours and mine, our love of history definitely helps us a great deal in terms of solidifying who we are, and let us know, and it particularly let me know that there were people that preceded me that did well, and that we could do the exact same thing.
Absolutely. And the thing that I want to just hone in on with what you just said is that we can thrive.
Yes.
We can thrive.
Yes.
We can thrive. You know, and I think that because of the history and some of the ideas, the ideology, internalized racism, so on and so forth, we may not think, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, that we're worthy to achieve, to accomplish. You know, it's so easy to carry the gloom and doom. It's easy to carry some of those deficit-based narratives that have been imposed upon us. But it's oftentimes, I find with many people, it's harder to think about, well, we carry a legacy of trauma. Yes, there's brutality, and yes, there's violence, but as you just said, Mr. Nat, you called them off. You know, we can have businesses, we can be entrepreneurs and be successful at it. We can, you know, be wealthy. We can thrive, and that is okay, and that's fine. And I always felt as though that segregated communities, Black communities, because I've heard stories from my own kinfolk as well too. Louisiana, Chicago, and North Carolina, and I listen to their stories as well. And I know, Uncle Nat, you shared with me that you have folks extending all the way to South Carolina and other places as well.
Yeah.
You know, the thing that I always have felt is that when we look at unity, right, and we just had Kwanzaa, you know, Umoja, unity, the first principle. I always felt, Uncle Nat, that a great case study and a great thing for folks to look at are these segregated Black communities.
Yes.
You said, Uncle Nat, you didn't really have to go outside of your neighborhood from much.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really powerful. And I think that's why I love history, because you can really look into the past and use it as a vehicle and take some of those strategies and implement some of those methods and approaches and apply it to today. It might have to look a little bit different because this is 2025, right? This is not 1940, 1950, 1960, but we can still try to implement it maybe in a different way, but with the same result. So what do you think about that, Uncle Nat?
No, I totally agree. And really what happened to me, and I tried to pass it on to my children, that gave me a sense of, one, confidence in me, because I saw others doing things and being successful. My Black teachers instilled in me. When you talk about our museums and all, and our history, I think the other aspect of it too, when I finished, I wanted to go to a historical Black college.
Okay.
That was another aspect of it, because I went to an all Black high school and I saw all Black teachers. And so when I saw all these teachers who looked like me, and they were basically going out there to the various colleges, I asked them, where did you go to school? What did you do there? And so that was another aspect of it. I think also, and I'll touch basically a little bit later on the HBCU aspect of it, but I had an idea, and it was instilled in me because I saw people that were maybe not mentors in the true sense of being mentors, but I saw role models of those people, the doctors, the lawyers, the entrepreneurs out there, the educators. And it gave me a sense of confidence. No matter what I did, I didn't worry about or was concerned about I couldn't do because the color of my skin. If you were another person of another race, I looked at you basically as equal. And in some cases, probably, Marcus, I would tell you, not probably, I looked at myself probably as even more superior to you. Okay. That's just how I thought. And I walked into environments with that confidence because I saw people who looked like me that exhibited that type of confidence throughout my entire formative years, from principals of the high school to pastors. So I'm giving out the positions, but I saw these people, men and women, who looked like me, who looked like my sister or looked like my mother or whatever, in these roles. And I pass that on to my children the same way. Hey, you can succeed. You can do, because I saw the foundation that they laid, and I basically tried to create the same foundation for my children going forward. So,
well, Uncle Nat, let me also even ask you this. This confidence that you exude, and from day one when we connected, you always exuded a confidence in your abilities and what you knew you could accomplish, what you could take on, what you could do, what you could carry out. Tell us a little bit about your experiences. I know you have spent time as a Maryland state police officer. I know you also, was at Bowie State doing things in a leadership capacity, not just as a student, to be clear, but also being an organizer on the ground there from an activist standpoint, and in other capacities. So tell us a little bit more about that confidence and how perhaps that confidence got tested to help you be the person that you are. Tell us about that.
It was, well, it's just a point of, I didn't know what the word no meant, really, I guess you could say. Or if someone told me, well, you can't do that, I said, no, I think I can. So, and it's just the way that I was. And really, I started off very quickly to an HBCU, and then in Virginia Union, and then I transferred to Bowie back in 1967. And as a side note, that's where I met my wife there. But during that time, 1967 to 1968, as you probably know, that was very strong in the civil rights movement. And also it was very strong in the college activism. The HBCUs were very active, and the various organizations, the NAACP was very strong during that time. The CORE, Congress of Racial Equality. This was also the Black Panther movement was getting traction. SNCC with Stokely Carmichael and all was getting traction out there. So we started seeing on the college campuses that activism. And I basically was never one to sit on the sidelines. I wanted to get involved. And I wanted to be an activist in there and get involved. And really, when I got to Bowie, that was tested, because then it was during the time when the campus activities were at its height. Some people will call it the campus disorders. I call it the campus activism was at its height, or was really starting to peak. And that was at Howard and all. And Bowie State College at the time also demonstrated their activism in terms of really trying to change the conditions at Bowie. And one of the things that I say I wear with a badge of honor on a unfortunate date, but April 4th, 1968 will always be remembered in my mind, in my mind and others. April 4th, 1968 was the day Martin Luther King was assassinated. Well, Marcus, at that date and that time, myself and my wife, we were students at Bowie State College, and we were part of over 200 students that were arrested in Annapolis at the State House for participating in a student demonstration where we refused to leave the State House, and we were arrested for trespassing that exact same date. And I found out later, and you'll love this, going back to the present, the Maryland Historical Society here in Baltimore has a whole expose on the Bowie demonstration, and that blew my mind.
That's right. That's right. Shout out to Maryland Center History and Culture. Shout out to them. Yep.
Yes. I went there and looked, and they shared that with me. I said, oh my goodness. They've had the newspaper coverage of it and all. And I told them when we were taking the tour, I said, you know what you have there, I'm part of that history. I'm part of that demonstration. So again, it was
living history.
Living history. So that was my connection as far as history, as far as the college and being an activist there. And it's just how ironic when you talk about my career as far as law enforcement. It was a point where when we returned back to Bowie on that same date, April 4th in the evening, the Maryland State Police was on the campus, and they had literally closed the campus down because they were afraid that we were going to come back because they were rioting in DC, and they thought that we were going to damage the college, so they shut it down. And during that time, I met a colonel there and asked them a question about how long will the college close, and he gave me the point. He said, well, it's going to close and reopen probably after Easter. Well, fast forward, they closed the college, we opened in Easter, and I then dropped out of school and was being considered for the military draft. This was during the Vietnam War. And I saw myself really being selected by the Secret Service to be, in this sense, being drafted into the military. I decided to join the police department to get a deferred. And my best friend told me, because I was thinking about joining the Baltimore City Police, he said, Nat, that's not you. I said, what do you mean? He said, no, knowing your ego and whatever, you should join the state police. And oddly enough, through that conversation, we were in Baltimore City at the time. I said, you know what, Steve? You're right. Let me go down and see if I can join the state police. And since we're here in Howard County, you and I drove to the Waterloo Barracks right there on 175 and Route 1. And got an application to join the state police in Maryland. And fast forward, I got accepted. And as you saw in the Museum of Howard County Center of African American Culture, when we honored living history and the first African American to join the state police, Milt Taylor, I was the 10th African American to join the Maryland State Police. So there's a little bit of history there. And then I left the state police after 5 years, went to Prince George's County for 3 years. And the ironic thing about after leaving Prince George's County, it came full circle. I was offered a position to be the first chief of police or the deputy chief of public safety at Bowie State College at the time. And I said, it's ironic, only 12 years later, I was a student there. Now I'm coming back as their chief of police at Bowie State University, which was Bowie State College then. So history has a way sometimes, as they say, as strange repeats itself or strange bedfellows. The school that I attended for 1 year, met my wife, I come back 12 years later, and I'm the chief of police there at the college.
But you know what, though? Here's a way that I see it, Uncle Nat. I think you came back to your community.
Yes.
You returned and poured into that which poured into you. from that perspective, I think it's upstanding. And um, you know, the police force, especially nowadays, gets a lot of scrutiny and there's
Mhm.
controversy associated with it. But I'm sure you probably would say that over the years and in time, um, I don't know. You are in a better position to say than me, but maybe some things have changed, things have evolved. I know your heart, and I know you got into it to serve your community, to
Mhm.
protect
Yeah.
individuals, to care in a pure sense and in a pure form. And so I know that you also are involved, with Love is the Answer. Once again, shout out to the team there, Brother AJ Ali, trying to also do the necessary work with these um, police forces and these local law enforcement entities to also make sure that what is being done is something that could be more supportive than harmful to our community. And so I want to, shout out to also Miss Joan Carter Smith, who's tuning in, who was also with us when Mr. Nat and I were doing our thing. And
Yes. Shout
you
out
know,
to Joan. Yes.
absolutely. I think I might have saw Sean Gladden also
Hey,
hop on.
Sean.
Yeah,
Yes. Okay,
what's going
Sean.
on, Sean Gladden? Shout out to Sean Gladden. He's doing a lot of big things in PA and stuff, but he definitely has some Howard County roots. Shout out to Wild Lake as
Oh,
well,
yes.
Sean. And you're well, they're grown now, but your
My
children,
two, yeah, my son
yeah,
and daughter are graduates of Wild Lake. Absolutely. Go
absolutely.
Cats.
Absolutely. So shout out to them and anybody else who's tuning in for that matter. But with that, let's pivot a little bit and talk about the museum experience, Uncle Nat. Let's go there.
Sure.
Once again, we met each other with the effort in front of us to reopen a museum
Hmm.
and to foster educational programming and to implement long-term sustainability practices. And so, as we talked just the other day, there were so many things that opened our eyes, engaging with the public, taking things on the road,
Hmm.
building the exhibits, taking people in, telling the stories. What did that experience do for you? What did that experience do for you at a local, intimate institution, a Black institution here? What did that experience do for you, Uncle Nat?
It the experience, Marcus, one, meeting people like you and Joan Carter Smith was an absolutely fantastic experience there for me. Number two, I think with the two of you, along with myself, we were able to explore Howard County. And when I say Howard County, even though it was headquartered here in Columbia, we really had an opportunity to reach out to the entire county, the African American community outside of Columbia. We were able to do that. And that was a beautiful experience. When you interviewed Mr. Barksdale, for an example, and talking about how he grew up here in Howard County, even before 29 was a single lane, or was a dual lane highway. And
Mm.
we talked about, and he shared with you his experiences. And the museum, what I think we did was took it outside of just Columbia, because yes, we know Columbia has a history, but we took it outside of Columbia and incorporated Howard County,
Hmm.
Cooksville, Daisy, the Route 1 corridor, Jessup. When we talked about the Green Book and the Lincoln Hotel on Route 1 being part of that in terms of people traveling. Yes, the Green Book, and part of Howard County being part of that. So really, we were in a situation and a place where we educated people, not just from Columbia, because the Colombians that were here basically didn't have all that history of Howard County. Yes, there were people, we connected the Harriet Tubman School there. We did that. And I thought that was just fascinating to hear and see people talk about that school, the Harriet Tubman School. And then I think you remember too, we even talked to several people coming out of Carroll County that came down because they heard about us and what we were doing. So it was an experience there in terms of past history, but we also talked about living history.
That's right.
We had people there, and this is the other thing that museums, I think we were on that track of talking about living history here in Howard County. Vernon Gray, first African-American to join the county council. Calvin Ball, which is living history. Our first African-American county executive. And then we look at where you are at Howard County Community College, Dr. Daria Willis leading that presidency there. And looking at also what's happening there at the library. So we were identifying people like Tanya Aiken there at the library, or Marcus Paris there in the sheriff's department, or at the same time too, may he rest in peace, the former superintendent of schools there,
Dr. Sidney Cousins.
Dr. Sidney Cousins. So all that's part of Howard County history. The First Baptist Church of Elk Ridge, you know, all of those things were part of what the museum was doing, the Howard County Center of African American Culture. And what you were doing as a curator was telling that story. My role was strictly that, hey, let's take the museum to another level in certain areas of funding, maybe in certain areas of exposure, having relationships with the other museums within the state. We talked about the Benjamin Banneker Museum there in Baltimore County, or we talked about the Slave Museum over there in Montgomery County, or the Harriet Tubman Museum in Cambridge and all. So we were connecting there. And the big boy that I always say that downtown Baltimore was the Reginald Lewis Museum. So we were building those relationships. So when people came to our museum, we just would talk, wasn't focused just on Columbia, but Howard County. And we really wanted to make it very clear that was the Howard County Center of African American Culture, letting them know that it's not just Columbia, as I said earlier, but it's the entire county, and recognizing that we're Blacks, African Americans were here before Columbia, and getting them the recognition, like Miss Joan Carter's family that has history here in Howard County, the Barksdales that had history here. So people coming in could understand that history and have her right there talk about her family, and have someone who's a descendant of that, the Roger Carter Center. Well, that was named after her father. So those are the connections that, Marcus, I can tell you right now, I got excited about. And just was so much appreciative that you and Joan Carter were there to share that history to everyone that was coming in, and we could bring that connection to the entire community.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's something that is going to stay with me for the rest of my life. And I just remember after the hard work of having a small team, you know, shout out to Kyla Cruz.
Come a little closer because we can't hear you a little bit.
Okay, can you hear me now? Am I good? Can you hear me?
You're still a little bit low.
Still a little bit low. I'm not sure what to do. I've just been sitting here as I've been. I'll
keep talking. There you go.
Okay. No, I was reminiscing and reflecting on how in the museum, I remember we got the exhibits up and running, 3 rooms. First room, local Howard County history, Underground Railroad, takes you on into Delaware and Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York. Then in the second room, civil rights, human rights, living history. And then you remember, Uncle Nat, third room, the African global diaspora. And so seeing people's response to that, people of all walks of life, people of different backgrounds, people of different ethnicities, breaking down and crying, or looking at stuff, seeing I remember Dr. Sidney Cousins' family seeing him on the wall, and that gave them so much pride in seeing a family member on the wall, or looking at the image in the Africa room and seeing how many trips were made from the shores and continent of Africa to South America, Central America, on up to North America, and grappling with that. I remember people coming in and they were like, should I take my shoes off? Because when they came in, it was so immaculate, and it just spoke to them. And so there's so many different things I could think about, and how we band together, and took our resources, our meager resources, and made it happen. And so I look at it as like a community project to get the exhibits up. And that's right, Miss Joan. We gave people the wow factor. Museum on the go programs at libraries and schools, and at various educational centers, visitation, and people coming in talking to you, Uncle Nat, and talking to Miss Joan about Guilford history, internships, with students and teenagers and adolescents to learn the history, um, a traveling lecture series that we had implemented as well too, an oral history program. And I know, Uncle Nat, you oftentimes talk about the importance of digitizing the history and preserving the history. And so these things are very important. And so I would say, Uncle Nat, tell those tuning in from your purview, from your standpoint, because museums are still a business. They still are a business. They're an institution. What are some of the things we have to really keep in mind, as you used to say, when we think about the long game, when we think about long-term sustainability and legacy for our children's children? What do we need to do to make sure that we continue to preserve this history so it doesn't get lost or distorted? What would you say to that?
Well, Marcus, I would tell you the first thing that I would say to any person that's listening now to and watching the two of us in here in regards to museums, you've got to support them. You've got to support them financially first. Museums are a business. When we look at the Smithsonian and the museum in Washington, D.C., and look at the Reginald Lewis Museum and all the other smaller museums throughout the entire state of Maryland, they need our support as people of color. So I would say the first thing, if you get an opportunity to serve or to be a friend of a museum or to be on a board, recognize that, yes, you need to support them whatever you possibly can financially and all. I think number two, we've got to preserve them, sure, because that's our history. That's our history that needs to be preserved so our young people and our not so young people can come in there and see what has occurred in the past, what's happening in the future or the present, and give them the inspiration and the desire to strive to make sure that there's a future out there. Because what we did at the museum, and you're absolutely right, we had 3 sections in there. And the thing that I really loved, more so, probably a little bit more than the other 2, was the living history. People who are the trailblazers, who every day are rewriting the history book, so to speak. The longer that they stay in their positions, or they're the first ones in there and they open the door for others to follow, that's living history. And so they're going back to the past, where we've got people in the museum that have paved the way for the folks of today, and they will open the door for tomorrow. So I think museums definitely have a part, because, again, when you can see your history and see how we survive, yes, you're right. You know where you come from. It's necessary on that. And I mentioned that in the beginning. Coming out of my community where I grew up, that's history. And I can remember those people instilling in me, yes, you can do. So when you go back and look at these museums, where they're the repository of our accomplishments, they're the repository of our struggles, they're the repository of our fights for human rights, for equal rights, that should inspire young people that we're seeing in the high schools and middle schools, when they do their research and go, wow, I didn't know that. Well, guess what? This person lived in your community. Or if you take it on a national level, you can see the so-called Madam C.J. Walkers of the world. And even most recently, when we start bringing back that living history or recapturing that old history, you probably have seen the movie The Six Triple Eights.
Oh yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Uncle Nat, because next week we're going to be having a panel to break down that film and talk about it. But go right ahead, powerful film. Go right ahead.
Well, that's a good segue. I guess a good segue. But again, we're at a point, and I love what Tyler Perry has done in terms of bringing that history to light, where now that we've got it, and we can go back and research that, where these women, just like the Tuskegee Airmen and others before us, we've got that history. And it should inspire people to strive to do more. So now that film is part of what? Film history.
It is. Absolutely.
And now it'll inspire people to go back and research, hey, the 888, yeah. And we've got here in Howard County, we've got a statue down there right by Whole Foods of Miss Minnie Bailey.
That's right.
That's right. History.
That's history.
That's history. Right. And I encourage people to learn more about her. So again, absolutely, whether it's a museum that's being housed or it's in somebody's home or whatever, it's our history, absolutely, our story, our inspiration. And so I'm thankful of one, you, Joan, and I, our paths coming together during that time at the Howard County Center of African American Culture. I'm glad for that. And that we understand, and we are, in my opinion, have a new, renewed drive and passion to protect and preserve our history. And these museums are a central part of that preservation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, even the research supports, Uncle Nat, that there's been a increase in people wanting to know local history. Mm-hmm. I know with the Charlottesville uprisings and things that happened a few years ago, people grappling with the idea of, should statues remain up or should they come down? Is there a racist history to it, or should it remain up? But what also has happened is, like you said, people feel an extra connection and an extra piece of relatability to something that happened in their neck of the woods, in their neighborhood, on mm-hmm. their home turf. And we saw this play out when people would come into the museum and they would say, oh, this Methodist church is right in my backyard, or mm-hmm. my grandmother takes me to Locust United Methodist Church, or I remember growing up listening to the sermon of such and such at First Baptist Church of Guilford. Mm-hmm. So it gives extra meaning. I know even research in Howard County, I know there was some data that was done, and I know that they did a study and they surveyed people who were coming to Howard County, and historic Ellicott City is an attraction amongst other things, and they found that many who come to Howard County for visitation purposes come to explore local historic sites and to learn local history. And so history is everywhere. The names of schools, the names of streets, look at statues, even our names. Everything has a history if you go deep enough to explore it. And so I just find it fascinating. I love it. And it's really awesome. So I know that time is soon going to be running out, unfortunately, because I'm having a blast. I'm having a ball. But why don't you give people your contact information so they can reach out to you? I know that you're connected to some other entities.
Sure.
Yeah, well, so go ahead, Uncle Nat.
It's very easy. They can reach me through my website. That's natalston.com. That's NATALSTON.com. And the email address is very easy. It's natalston@natalston.com. So it's easy for them to pick that up. Give me a shout. I'm involved in a lot of things here in Howard County because I believe and love this county, and I love this state of Maryland. We're rich in our history. And even now, Marcus, when we talk about our living history, and I share it all the time, we've got our first Black governor. That's living history.
It is.
We've got our first African-American U.S. Senator, Angela Also Brooks. That's living history. So I'm telling you right now, it is absolutely, we're at a great time. We're seeing living history as we live and breathe. And it's a good opportunity for our young people to attach on to these people and see, hey, I can do it too. So again, Marcus, as you said, history heals, and learn from the past, heal for the future. And I'll say this in closing too. We both are on the same vein because on my website, I'm interviewing people now, and I have it as lifelong legacy, wisdom of the past, passion for the future. And I'm setting up interviews. So if anyone is listening, if you're 70 years and older, I want to interview you because you've got living history. And if you're 70 years and older and been married over 50 years, I want to interview you because that's living history also. So again, Marcus, I owe a lot to you. You planted or deepened that history buff seed in me to say, yes, learn from our past and we can heal for the future. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure. And, I don't have a whole lot to say after that. I'm glad that you were able to engage in conversation with me this evening, Uncle Nat. And I always learn something new about you every time we talk, even though we've talked a lot. I just want to raise up another resource before we wrap things up. This is a great resource here. From storefront to monument, tracing the public history of the Black Museum movement, which took place in the 60s. And there's a quote by June Jordan where she says these words, quote, "Take me into the museum and show me myself, show me my people, show me soul America. If you cannot show me myself, if you cannot teach my people what they need to know, and they need to know the truth, and they need to know that nothing is more important in human life, then why shouldn't I attack the temples of America and blow them up?"
All right.
We can feel the emotion and the candid anger and frustration in those words. But I think underneath that, it is important to humanize Black lives. And when we allow Black folks to tell their story, then that helps us to humanize a group of people that for so long have been dehumanized, that have been pushed to the margins of history, that have been said they're 3/5 of a human being, or Dred Scott, 1857, there are no rights that will be respected in terms of a Black person. And we can go on and on and on and on, but history heals. And this platform, it's about bringing the pieces of us together so we can become whole and so we can heal on an individual level and also on a collective level. And so with that being said, once again, make sure that you hop on YouTube, subscribe, like. Those tuning in, shout out to Brother King. I saw you pop up on here. Saw your face. Good to see you, good brother. Spread the word, share the word. But this is a healing space, and it's designed to be able to foster rejuvenation, restoration, and healing through the lens of history. And so once again, shout out to Brother Ja Logic behind the scenes, making things go. And so next week, we're going to be back, same time, doing our thing, but we're then going to be breaking down, as you said, Uncle Nat, 688. And we're going to get into that. So feel free to tune in, Uncle Nat, next week if you're able to. And
we'll do.
But it's going to be powerful. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and sign off from here. Peace and love, y'all. Take care.
All right.